Episode 1 of Hanna kicks off in Romania circa 2003. An ex-CIA agent, Eric Heller, leaves his house at exactly 2 a.m. He stops his car, discards the keys, and walks to a heavily fortified building. He's able to get into the building with his ID, but then he has to sneak into a locker room to steal another person's ID to have access to the whole place. And with access to the entire building, he makes his way to a room with a bunch of newborn babies, and he takes one of them. As he's trying to get out of the building, he ends up getting caught by 3 guys, but he makes quick work of them, including throwing one into a fire. He is able to escape, and he's evading gunshots, and then he hands the baby off to a woman who is waiting by a car in the woods, and the two are able to get away. They stay at a motel, but the next morning, Eric sees somebody show up that he recognizes, and he frantically escapes. He's able to hotwire a vehicle and get away just in the nick of time as she's firing gunshots off at him. They don't know if they were able to get away or not until that same woman returns on a helicopter, and she tells the pilot to light him up, which forces Eric to go off-road into the woods. And he is able to lose the helicopter, but he gets to one part of the woods where it's open plains, and he knows that if he can get over this field, he'll be good to go, but that's easier said than done because once he starts driving on the field, the helicopter sees him one more time and starts firing at him. And this causes Eric to crash the car, and the woman inside dies on impact. As the woman who is chasing them instructs the helicopter to touch down so she can see if anybody survived, the car explodes. But Eric was able to survive, and he was able to escape along with the baby. Now we fast forward to 2019, where Eric has trained this child at the age of 16 to become an absolute killing machine. And of course, the child is named Hanna. The two have been living in the forest ever since that day where the car blew up, and Eric has been homeschooling Hanna, teaching her multiple languages along with geography and even some pop culture stuff. But the biggest thing he has taught her is self-defense. And the training montages are like if John Wick was mixed with Rocky IV, and it's resulted in a 16-year-old savage. And every night he goes through their main rule, that humans are not to be trusted, and if she sees one, to find him. And if there's not time to find him, then she's supposed to hide. And if she can't hide, she's instructed to attack. And Eric's been able to keep Hanna isolated from the human world by donning some of the trees with red paint, and when she sees the red paint, she's not supposed to go past them. But she wants to go past those red trees. And he tells her that I'm worried that the same people that killed your mother will come after you. But she says, well, if we're never going to leave, then why are you training me? And it's because one day he might not be there, and she needs to be ready. But curiosity gets the best of her, and she starts hopping along trees like George of the Jungle, and makes her way to a logging camp, where she sees a boy probably about a year older than her, cutting up some trees. And he starts asking her where she's from, and she points to the woods, but that doesn't deter him at all, like as if that's a normal thing. He offers her a Snickers bar, and she takes that, and he asks her if she has a name, but she doesn't say anything. And she hasn't said anything in this entire conversation up to this point. And we learn that the boy's name is Arvo, and he offers to get help by texting his father, but she grabs the phone. And when he grabs it back, because that's a pretty rude thing to do, she almost breaks his wrist. And this pisses off Arvo, where he gets on his ATV and says, I'm out of here, and leaves, as she's begging him not to tell anybody that she was there. That night when Hanna returns to the cave, Eric asks her where she was, and she lies to him, and he knows it. She then asks who are the people that killed her mother, but he just says they were bad people, and she blows up on him, saying, I have to tell you everything, but you don't tell me anything. And this lack of information is pushing Hanna away, where the next day she once again goes to meet with Arvo. She asks him, are you mad at me? And he says, well, what do you think? But since he's a teenage boy and she's a teenage girl, he's not that mad at her, because he once again gives her a Snickers bar. And then he starts asking some questions, like, what does your father do? And she says, he takes care of me. But he asks, no, like, what is his job? She just takes a puff of his cigarette, although her lungs weren't built for that. And she starts coughing up a storm. Don't smoke, kids. She then asks what's down the road, and he says it's the cabin that me and my father stay in, but after that, it's nothing for about 100 kilometers. And she wants to know what's beyond the forest, and Arvo finds it amazing that she has no idea about anything outside of that forest. And when he asks why that's the case, she says that people are dangerous and not to be trusted. He says, well, not everybody. He then offers to take her to see something cool, and she hops on the ATV, and they travel to a restricted area where they're staring at this giant satellite. And she says, what is it? He says, well, if you call somebody or send a text message to somebody on the other side of the world, this is what sends it. But she's never even heard of a text message before. Not to be deterred, though, Arvo breaks the padlock on the ladder and the two climb up, although they're unaware that the thing is monitored by the police. So as they're lying on the satellite dish and Arvo's trying to make his move, they hear 3 police officers with dogs coming after them. Arvo immediately gives himself up, but Hanna takes off running into the woods. And when she gets back to the cave, she tells Eric exactly what happened, and his big concern is that did they see your face or not? And also, is Arvo to be trusted? And she does say that she thinks Arvo is to be trusted, and she reluctantly says that she thinks that they did see her face. And with back-to-back days of Hanna going past the red markers, he asks, "Do you want to live outside of the forest even though it's dangerous?" And she says yes. He then hands Hanna a picture of a woman, and she asks, "Who is this?" He says, "That's the woman who killed your mother. And if we're going to live outside of the forest, we need to find her before she finds us." And the woman is a CIA operative named Marissa Viegler, and she was the woman in 2003 who was chasing Eric and the woman in the car. And Marissa is currently living in Europe with her boyfriend and her boyfriend's son. And one day, while out with the two, she covertly meets with another CIA operative named Carl Meisner, who lets her know exactly what happened at that satellite dish near Poland. And how after Arvo was caught, he told the police that he was with a girl who lived in the forest. And he's telling her this because he knows that she's always been after Eric Heller. And she tells Meisner that he was last seen about 60 miles from there until he killed his girlfriend and escaped in the forest with his baby daughter. She then asks Meisner to keep it under wraps for now, but if anything comes of it, to let her know first. She also wants to talk to the security detail that caught Arvo. And after talking with that security detail, she sends a bunch of soldiers into the forest, but Hanna heard it coming first. And because of that, her and Eric were able to pack up the cave and flee. And as they're trying to get away, they overhear one soldier's radio where he's directed to kill the man but keep the girl alive. But Eric and Hanna kill him, taking his guns, but then Hanna knows that she is surrounded. And she knows it's only a matter of time before the soldiers that are in the woods catch up to them if they stay where they are. And they know that they have to split up. And right before they go their separate ways, Eric goes through the plan with Hanna that they've had if this situation had ever occurred. She is to send postcards every day from her location, and then she's supposed to go to a certain location every single day and meet at the same time so that they can be reunited. And he also goes through her entire backstory that's made up. And the last thing that he hammers home is that Marissa Viegler is not to be trusted because she lies. Both Hanna and Eric take off in separate directions, and Hanna grabbed the soldier who they killed's radio. And with that radio, she overhears one of the soldiers say that he has Eric in his sights, and he gets the okay to kill him. So to divert everybody's attention, she pops on the radio and says, "Help me." And it allows Eric to escape and get away. And she basically gives herself up, and all the soldiers come to find her, and she makes up a story how Eric left her there because she was too slow and how she's scared. Marissa, by the way, is watching all of this go down from a body cam footage. And she's in the same room as Carl Meisner and asks him if a certain black site is open. And unofficially it is, and she says send her there and label her a terror suspect. As well as a shoot-on-sight policy for Eric. And if anybody asks, Hanna does not exist. In episode 2, they take Hanna to a Black Ops site outside of Morocco, and they start interrogating her, asking her if she knows Arvo, but she's not really speaking. And after a few more questions, she just requests to speak to Marissa Viegler. And Marissa is watching this all go down on camera. So they send in a fake Marissa Viegler, and Marissa, the real one, is talking to her in her ear, telling her what she's supposed to say. She asks Hanna, "Did you know that your father worked for me in Berlin in 2001? And Hanna either lies or is truly not aware of it. And they're trying to find out from Hanna where Eric is, because they're claiming that Eric was the one who killed her mother. And as they're interrogating her, Meisner gets a phone call telling him that the test results were through the roof. And Marissa is overhearing this saying, "Well, then send them to me." But then Hanna goes in and gives the fake Marissa Viegler a hug. And the real Marissa notices that she's faking it. And both her and Meisner are warning this person to get out of there, but it's too late. Hanna kills him. And then she takes out everybody else in the room. She's able to escape the facility by killing a couple people. She is able to grab her file that's on record. She finds some army fatigues and gets out of there. And while in the middle of the Moroccan desert, she runs into a girl named Sophie. And Sophie is there with her family, which includes her mother, father, and little brother. But Sophie is miserable on this trip. And their car is broken down, and she's sick of it, and she says, "I'm walking home." The problem is, you're in the middle of nowhere, and she got lost. And when she finds Hanna, it's kind of the life vest that she's been waiting for. And Hanna is able to get her back to her family, and because of that, her family gives Hanna a ride. And they have any normal, typical questions that a family would have when you find a teenage girl in fatigues just traveling around the desert. But Hanna tells them how her dad is an accountant living in Holland, and her mother is dead, and her father lets her travel on her own because it builds character. They drop Hanna off in a Moroccan market, and the family goes to have lunch. But the family agrees they should probably just end this trip because it's not going well and everybody's miserable, even though the mother really wanted it to go well. And as they all go back to the car, Sophie notices Hanna walking through the market, and she's able to sneak Hanna into their car and onto the ferry to get back to Europe. And while on the ferry, Hanna and Sophie go to the duty-free shop, and you realize just how isolated Hanna was because she's clueless to just about everything that a teenage girl would be aware of, including the fact that duty-free doesn't actually mean free, you have to pay for stuff. And also, her fashion is terrible, so Sophie gives her a makeover. But Sophie wants to know what the hell's going on. Were you human trafficked? Are you running away from home? Does this have to do with a boy? And Hanna says, kind of. and Sophie stops with the questions. When they get off the ferry, Sophie asks her dad if they can drop Hanna off at home in Amsterdam, but her father is very against it. And it takes some convincing from the mother just to agree to drop her off in France. But Hanna can feel somebody staring at her. And this is a guy that Marissa Viegler has hired named Jacobs. And Marissa knows him from working with him in the CIA, but he's since gone on his own. And Marissa can't exactly direct CIA operatives to the task of getting Eric and Hanna back, so she has to go through back channels like Jacobs to do so. And Jacobs has been able to track Hanna down. And that night, the family stops at a hotel, and Jacobs goes in the room, but Hanna and Sophie aren't there. Because Hanna and Sophie have snuck out for the night to go to a club. And at the club, Sophie is able to convince her to drink, which she didn't really want to do because it slows the reaction time. But Sophie says, are you going to just do everything your father tells you to do? And with that encouragement, Hanna just starts throwing them back. And that night, a drunk Hanna tells Sophie the real story, that she doesn't live in Amsterdam, and that she's actually trying to get to Germany to meet up with her father. And her father has arrived in Germany after putting a bunch of animal grease on his body and swimming there from Poland, after making a pit stop by killing a bunch of police officers, CIA operatives. It doesn't really matter. He took out some people and went on a swimming excursion. And Hanna has followed the plan. She's already sent her first postcard, which Eric got. But Hanna probably shouldn't be telling Sophie this. She also pulls out her file and asks Sophie to read it, asking, what does this mean? And in the file, it says that Hanna's DNA is abnormal. And we've kind of seen signs of this already. It's like Hanna has a spidey sense. The next day, the family arrives at the train station, and they've kind of gotten attached to Hanna. The mother gives her some money, and Sophie goes and walks her to the platform. And Hanna lets Sophie know that she doesn't want to leave, but she has to. And Sophie writes down her address and gives her an open invitation to stop by whenever she wants. But then Hanna's spidey sense goes off, and she looks around, and there are a bunch of guys looking at her, and she pushes Sophie away, saying, get away from me. And she tries to run off, but Sophie chases after her. And one of those guys is Jacobs, who wanted to wait to grab Hanna until she was away from the family, but Marissa told him to grab her now. And he approaches Hanna, telling her that we have your father and he wants to see you, everything's all right, but Hanna starts taking him out along with the rest of his operatives. And right before she's about to shoot one of them in the head, Sophie yells, no, don't, and then actually spares the guy's life. Hanna then runs onto a train platform, hops on the back of a moving train, and takes off. And Sophie's just left standing there, stunned. In episode 3, Jacobs has located Sophie's family, and he's playing himself off as somebody that was sent by Hanna's mom. And they say, Hanna told us her mom died, but he said, that's preposterous. We need to find her, and we're concerned for her safety, because not necessarily of anything she did, but more so her father. And then Jacob shows them a picture of dead bodies, indicating that Eric's the one who killed him. And Sophie's mom is saying, if she told you anything, let us know. And of course, Hanna told Sophie about the real plan. And Hanna has made it to Germany, and she goes to the meeting spot, but her dad isn't there. She gets accosted by a local drug dealer and ends up pulling a gun out on him until Eric pops up, takes the guy out, and sends him on his way. The two end up going and grabbing food, and Eric is kind of interrogating her, asking her if she was followed. Did she tell anybody about Germany? Where were they keeping you? And after the Spanish Inquisition, they end up going to meet with a bunch of people that served with Eric in the military. And they go to this rundown hotel that's been abandoned for years, and Hanna doesn't want to stay there. She wants to stay at a hotel. But Eric kind of laughs and says, well, when this is all over, you can stay at a hotel, but for now, we're going to stay here. And later that day, Hanna overhears Eric talking to his army buddies, saying that Hanna told somebody about Germany. She lied to me. And we don't have much time here. The group heads off that night to break into an arms depot, and they make Hanna stand guard in the car. The group is able to clear out an entire storage container of arms, but the local police show up. And Hanna is able to alert them to this by blaring on the horn and then driving up to them and picking them up. Just in the nick of time, nobody gets shot. But the incident is reported by the cops. But Eric was right, because Jacobs was able to find out that they were coming to Germany. And Marissa has shown up and alerts the local CIA office of who Eric Heller is and that everybody should be on the lookout for him. That night, Marissa meets with Jacobs at the hotel bar and lets him know that once they catch Heller, she's going to hand him over to Jacobs and let Jacobs do his thing. But Jacobs can sense a little bit of nervousness coming from Marissa. And she admits that she now has a life with a guy and a son, and she's not going to let Eric Heller, of all people, mess that up. And Jacobs kind of chuckles and said, I get it. Get rid of Heller, get rid of the past. I mean, we did some pretty dark stuff. But it doesn't seem like Marissa sees it that way. And Jacobs isn't the only person thinking about the past, because Hanna asked Eric what he did for Marissa. And initially, he doesn't want to talk about it, but Hanna keeps egging him on and talk, and finally he reveals that once he got in the army, he was hard up for money and ended up working for Marissa. And at first, it was just simple as hunting bad people down and killing them. But after a while, he quit and moved to Romania to start a life, but she tracked him down with more work. And that work included standing outside of an abortion clinic and convincing would-be moms who were about to abort their babies to sign them over to this company. And Eric was really good at it. And one of those women, of course, was Hanna's mother. It's also worth mentioning that you seem to get a sense that these two once had a romantic relationship. The next day, Marissa heads to the armory that was broken into, but unbeknownst to her, she's being tailed by one of Eric's associates. And Eric is having this person follow Marissa to find out where Marissa is staying and what room she's staying in. And Marissa's best guess, according to the description given to her by the local police, is that Eric must be working with people that he formerly served with. So she wants to track down, through cross-referencing his service records, to see if anybody that Eric served with is living in Berlin. And sure enough, they get a match. When she gets back to the hotel, she can sense that she's being followed. And as soon as she gets to her room, she calls up Jacobs. And she realizes in that moment that while she thought she was chasing Eric Heller, he was actually luring her to Berlin, and he's chasing her. And it's really nothing more than a giant cat and mouse game. And as Marissa is figuring that out, Eric is headed to the house of a former buddy of his, who the group initially wanted to get in on this job, but he turned it down because he has a family, and Eric is there trying to convince him otherwise. And this guy named Dieter served with Eric in the army and would be the perfect getaway driver, but he doesn't want to do it. And Eric is sitting in his car stressed out until he gets a knock on the window, and it's Dieter telling him, "I'll only work for emergencies, and I'm not killing anybody. You have my number," and he walks off. The next day, thanks to Marissa's cross-referencing of Eric Heller's service record, she's able to find Lucas. And she has Jacobs pick Lucas walking out of a bar, and she interrogates him saying, "If you give up Eric Heller, we can erase that bar debt that you have." And it is a hefty bar debt. But Lucas is a loyal guy and doesn't want to give up his buddy. And when Lucas gets up to leave, she says, "You should probably think about who you're working with. I mean, what did he tell you about that girl?" And Lucas says, "She's his daughter." And Marissa goes, "Is she? I mean, before you risk your life, you should probably ask yourself how much you actually know about him." And that little pep talk seemed to work because Lucas is now on Team Marissa, although he's broken up about it. And initially, their plan is to have Lucas stay at the rundown motel with Hanna. The group will then confirm that Marissa is in the hotel, they'll go in, they'll kill her, and job's all done. But Hanna doesn't want to stay behind. She wants to go with. She wants to be an asset. And Eric doesn't want to let her do that, saying that you're the thing they want, and I'm trying to protect you. She then picks up a gun, shows pinpoint accuracy, and says, "What was the point of teaching me all that if you're never going to use me?" She then pulls out the DNA paper and says, "Can you explain this to me?" And when she pulls it out, Hannah's not the only one who wants to know what it is, because the rest of the group also wants to know what it is. And Eric just says it's nothing more than lies that Marissa told her. He vows to tell her the truth soon, but right now he has to go kill Marissa. He then ends up burning that DNA paper. Right before they leave, Eric apologizes to her and the two have a talk. And Hanna goes, "What's up with Lucas? He's nervous." And Eric says, "Well, we're all nervous." She says, "No, he's nervous like someone who knows they're about to die." And that's a prime example of Hannah's spidey sense. And when Eric hears this, he calls up Dieter to call in that emergency. He then says that Hanna is coming with them. And as the car is driving to drop Eric off, Hanna is able to pinpoint that there's a certain car with people with guns in it. So they know they're walking into a dangerous situation. But the group drops Eric off and he goes to meet Lucas at a cafe. And the cafe is being watched by Marissa along with Carl and a bunch of other soldiers. And they're really just waiting for Lucas to be able to get Eric out of the cafe so they can take him down. And they see Eric walk into the cafe, and now they're waiting for Lucas to hold up his end of the bargain. Rudy, another member of Eric's crew, gets out of the car, and now it's just Elsa and Hanna sitting in there waiting for their next directive. Jacobs, meanwhile, on the intel from Lucas, was sent to that hotel to take out Hanna, but when he gets there, he finds nobody. And he calls up Marissa to say, "Your boy had bad info," and she says, "Okay, get here now." When she gets back in the car, she tells Carl to put an international search warrant out for Eric Heller, and to say he was last spotted at the cafe that he's currently sitting in. Eric's emergency, though, has shown up, and Dieter takes over the car, and this allows Elsa to go do her job. Lucas, meanwhile, gets up to lead Eric out, but Eric gives him a hug, and the two end up switching uniforms. So when Lucas walks out, he looks like Eric. And Marissa pops out of the van and fires shots at him, which she didn't have the authorization to do. And when she gets there, she sees that she actually killed Lucas, and Eric is now on the run. He leads them down a wild goose chase through the hotel that Marissa is staying at, all the while throwing smoke grenades. And when Hanna hears the gunshot, she gets out of the car and goes running to help her dad. But when she gets to the foot of the hotel with all the smoke grenades, the gunshots, it's like a sensory overload, and she's just frozen there. And she doesn't even notice that Jacobs is behind her, ready to take her out. Luckily, though, Dieter shows up out of nowhere, hits Jacobs, picks her up, and the two drive off. While running through the hotel, Eric sees his picture on TV and knows that there's an international warrant out for him. But then his plan comes together. because when Marissa finds him, it's in an alley and he's on his knees with his hands behind his head with two police officers that have their guns drawn on him. And when Marissa shows up, she says he's mine, but those two police officers are actually Elsa and Rudy, who were working with Eric and had taken out two cops and stolen their uniforms, and now the three of them have guns pointed at Marissa. In episode 4, Dieter has arrived home with Hanna and is planning on keeping her there for a couple days, but Dieter's wife is none too pleased, because she's seen the TV and she can figure out who Hanna's dad is, and Dieter, trying to calm her down, is not helping. And another person who's seen that report is Jacobs, who returns to his hotel room to see the report, and he's pissed off because this was all supposed to be off the books, but he gets a call from Marissa telling him to meet her at a cafe she has Eric Heller. When Jacobs shows up at that cafe, though, she says, okay, now get in your car. And when Jacobs does that, he sees that his driver has been murdered, and Eric now has him at gunpoint, wanting some answers about who Marissa is. And Marissa was forced to call Jacobs at gunpoint from Rudy. And because of the information that Jacobs provided, when Eric gets back to where they're holding Marissa, he pretty much knows everything about her. The fact that she's now a CIA director, the fact that she has a posh life in France, the fact that she has a boyfriend who has a son, and he's using it to manipulate her. And because of the family angle now, Marissa's willing to do just about anything because she knows how dangerous Eric can be. And Eric's big concern is that international warrant. He also wants a plane to get him and Hanna out of the country. And Eric tells her, now we're going to work together. And just so you know that I'm not messing around, he takes out Jacobs and shoots him in the head. That night, Dieter goes to head out, but his wife is very concerned for his well-being. And Dieter reassures her that his army days are in the past, and now he's a simple cauliflower exporter to England. But Hanna doesn't either believe it or she doesn't want to be left behind, and she sneaks out, causing a distraction that allows her to sneak into Dieter's car. And the first stop is to that cauliflower loading dock, but what she sees isn't cauliflower. It's Dieter trafficking people from Berlin to England. He then heads to the safe house where he requests to speak to Eric, although Hanna and Rudy say that can't be possible because if you see Eric, now you're involved. But they do hand Dieter something and say, if things go south, send this to the local Berlin newspapers. And Hanna is watching all of this go down, mind you. Shortly thereafter, Hanna overhears Eric talking to Marissa, and Marissa is asking Eric, like, how much did you tell Hanna? And Eric says, enough. She then asks, does Hanna know the truth? And he says no. That night, Hanna ends up making it back to Dieter's place and sneaking back into his house. And Dieter is none the wiser. The next day, the group once again holds Marissa at gunpoint, but this time they force her to call Carl Meisner. And she sets up a meeting with her and Carl at a local cafe where she says, I have Eric Heller, but she hasn't been able to bring him in because he's in possession of highly classified details. And she doesn't want to bring him in and then involve the German government. So she's asking Carl to lift the warrant and get them a plane with one single pilot because she doesn't want anybody knowing that she's sneaking Eric out of the country. And the reason she's not telling Carl the real story is because she's surrounded by Eric's guys. And Carl's a little weirded out by this because he hasn't seen or heard from Marissa in a few days. And even though this is really weird, Meisner agrees to do it, but when he gets back to the office, his key card doesn't work. And he's buzzed in, but his whole staff has been let go. And there's now some guy named Jerome sitting there calling the shots. And Jerome is another deputy director that was brought in. And immediately, Jerome starts interrogating Meisner if he knows what a company called Utrex is. And Utrex was the company that both Eric and Marissa were working for, the company that bought Hanna from Joanna. But Carl is saying he knows nothing about it. He's simply following orders from Marissa. Jerome then lets Carl in on his theory, that Marissa doesn't actually have Heller, but that Heller actually has Marissa, and they're being played. And of course, Eric does have her, and at that same time, he's asking Marissa what happened to Joanna's body, did they have a funeral, and she says yes. He then asks, did you tell them that I'm the one who killed her? And she says, yeah, you broke protocol. I had to. And he's shaking his head saying she changed her mind. She was a mother of a child and she simply changed her mind. But she signed the child over. So Marissa doesn't really feel guilty about it. And the way Marissa sees it, Eric let his heart get in the way of his responsibility, which is totally reckless. And she's not wrong. Because Joanna ended up coming to Eric pleading to get her baby back, having regrets about signing the baby over to Utrex. And obviously the plea worked because Eric did end up getting Hanna back. And the way Marissa sees it, both Marissa and Eric were the ones that killed Joanna. He also asked what happened to the Utrex facility, and she said, we shut it down. Because after Eric broke in, they didn't have a choice. Utrex was a risky operation, but it was authorized at the highest level. And the orders were clear that after Eric broke in, nothing was to remain, including the children, who were lethally injected and then cremated. And the reason she's coming after Eric and Hanna so hard is because she had promised a lot of people in high positions that the matter had already been taken care of. And she can't let the news of them surviving get out. Later that day, Eric tells her that she will make the phone call to Meisner to confirm the plane, and then once they're on the plane and in the air, Rudy will let her go. As Eric's leaving, she says, say you get where you're going. Hannah's gonna find out. Children always find out. And Eric looks at her and says, I love Hanna, and I loved Joanna. Who have you ever loved? And right before he does leave, he whispers in Rudy's ear that as soon as she makes the phone call, kill her. Eric then meets up with Dieter and the group heads off to the airstrip. And she does as she's told. She calls up Carl Meisner to confirm the plane. But Meisner is surrounded by Jerome's people that he brought in. And as soon as she's done making that phone call, Rudy's about to kill her. And she's trying to talk him out of it. And it buys her enough time where somebody shoots Rudy. And that person is Jerome, because they were able to see Hanna on a CCTV camera and thus track down the safe house. But Marissa's never seen this guy in her life and asks, who the hell are you? And he says, I'm Jerome. Your friends from Utrecht sent me. But at this point, Hanna and Eric have been dropped off at the airstrip. And as they're walking to the plane, Hanna stops and says, are you my father? And she's asking this because she found what they handed to Dieter. And it was the agreement that Joanna signed with Utrecht to hand Hanna over. And under father, it said unknown. And Eric would really rather have this conversation on the plane. But Hannah's not willing to get on the plane with him until they have this conversation. And he's assuring her that, yes, I am your father. But then she asks, did you kill her? Did you kill my mother? She then fights him off and flees. And at that same moment, the cops show up in cop cars and a bunch of soldiers get off the plane, and it forces Eric to run. And when the group that dropped him off hears gunshots, they turn back around to pick him up. And right before he's able to get into the car, Jerome shoots him a couple times. But the group is able to pick up his body and get out of there. Hanna, however, escaped to Dieter's cauliflower export company and snuck out on a truck bound for England. So in episode 5, Hanna has made it to England and is staying at Sophie's place, but her parents don't know it, because she's sleeping in the van in the garage, and every once in a while, Sophie will bring her food. But in reality, she really thinks that she should call her dad, because it's been a week since she's arrived, and she's kind of concerned for her. But Hanna is completely against that, and makes Sophie swear that she won't tell anybody that she's there. That night, Sophie was planning on going to a party at her friend Dan's place, but she's forced to watch her brother. And the whole reason she wants to go to this party is to hook up with this guy named Anton, who's back in town. So she ends up risking it, sneaking out, leaving her brother at home alone, and taking Sophie with her to this party, thinking all the while that she can make it back before her parents do. And at the party, Hannah's having a little bit of sensory overload, so she starts drinking to numb that feeling. And while searching around the house, she opens up one door and finds Sophie's friend Dan making out with another guy. She then goes downstairs and starts dancing and having a good time until she catches the eye of somebody. And that person just happens to be Anton, the guy that Sophie was trying to hook up with. But Anton is transfixed with Hanna and invites both Hanna and Sophie to a movie night at his place the next night. The issue is, Sophie's parents came home early and they found her brother there sitting home alone. And they are pissed. So Sophie and a very drunk Hanna head back to their place. And that night, as Hanna is sleeping in the van, Sophie's dad ends up opening it up, sleeping in it, crying because his marriage is crumbling apart. Luckily, though, he doesn't catch Hanna. The next morning, Hanna tells Sophie about what happened the previous night with her dad, and Sophie tells Hanna that she's been grounded for leaving her brother there for a month. And the reason that they grounded her wasn't just for leaving her brother there, but also because there were a bunch of empty beer bottles in the conversion van. And Hanna feels really bad about getting Sophie in trouble, but Sophie says don't worry about it, they're just being ridiculous. The problem is she now can't go to Anton's movie night. And Anton has texted Sophie giving her his address, which is right around the corner. But just because Sophie doesn't go, doesn't mean Hanna has to stay behind too, and she ends up going to the party. And initially, she rings the doorbell but starts to walk away until Anton sees her and invites her back in. And as the group is watching the movie, Anton asks Hanna if she likes it, and she really doesn't. She then asks Anton, can you get me another beer? But then she just stands up, blocking the TV from everybody else, and is just staring at the movie. And the movie is a zombie movie, and she's watching all these people get killed in a gory fashion. But once again, the issue is she's blocking the TV, and everybody's telling her to move. And one guy throws popcorn at her, and when she turns around, she just kicks him right in the face, causing a scene. She runs out, Anton's right behind her, saying that it's okay, come back, what happened? But either way, Hanna goes back to Sophie's. And Dan, Sophie's friend, who was at the party, wants to know what's up with that girl and goes over to Sophie's and asks about her. And she says, she ran away from home and I'm just trying to help her out because her situation at home was really messed up. The next day, Sophie has a massive blow up with her parents about being grounded. And she tells her parents, why don't you two just get divorced? Because everybody that I know whose parents got divorced, their parents were a lot happier afterwards. And her dad, who is so stressed out, shoots back, well, maybe if you just obeyed us for 5 minutes, we wouldn't fight so much, putting all the blame on Sophie, and it makes Sophie feel like a piece of shit. And at this point, Sophie just wants to get out of there. But after the incident at the party the previous night, Hanna also wants to get out of there, and she's packing up things to go until all of a sudden the garage door opens up, and it's Sophie and Dan saying, come on, let's go, we're going somewhere. Hanna says, where are we going? She says, well, where do you want to go? And Hanna says, the forest. All right, we're going to the forest. And their group heads off camping. But not before they make a pit stop by picking up Anton. The first thing he says to Hanna is, last night wasn't your fault. And this is the first time that Sophie is finding out that Hanna actually went to the party, although it doesn't seem like she's really annoyed by it at all. And on the way to the forest at one point, it's just Hanna and Sophie in the back, and Sophie asks, did you talk to Anton last night? And Hanna lies to her saying, yeah, he was asking about you, and all of a sudden Sophie's in the best mood. So Hanna, Anton, Sophie, and Dan head out to the forest. They get drunk, they smoke weed, and eventually Sophie and Dan head back to the van to grab something, but they end up passing out. And now it's just Anton and Hanna sitting there. And they end up making out, which leads to clothes coming off. And it leads to Hanna losing her virginity in the forest. And at this point, we kind of know that Hannah's very different with her DNA. But both times she's gotten a chance to hook up with a boy, she's like raring to go. I mean, her hormones are like through the roof. Now, while things are going great for Sophie in England, things are not going great for Marissa Wiegler in Germany. On top of not being able to find Eric Heller, she's brought to a meeting with Jerome Sawyer, and Sawyer tells her, you're going to take a leave of absence, and you're going to get a psych evaluation to deal with the traumatic experience of getting kidnapped by Eric Heller. And they both know that that's a joke. She doesn't want to do it at all and tells him that I'm the only person that can get you Eric Heller and get you Hanna. And Sawyer lets her know, yeah, we used to feel that way, but not anymore. And Marissa, who at this point is pretty pissed off, says, that's fine, try to find her without me, but if you cook up this story that I'm crazy, I'm going to come after you. And it's not that far-fetched of a story, because after she was supposed to close down the Utrecht facility in Romania, her file clearly says she had psychological issues, and it's understandable because she was forced to kill a bunch of babies. So whether she likes it or not, she's going to have to go to therapy. And the therapist starts asking her questions like a typical therapist would, and she says, I'm going to tell you what I want. I want to be put back on the job where I'm the best person to obtain the agency's goals. And the therapist plays dumb, but Marissa says, there was a reason I was sent to you. Hanna should have been at the airport, but she wasn't, and there's a reason for that, and I can find that reason. So tell Sawyer to give me the support that I need, and I will find them. But the therapist just continues on with a normal therapy session. And Jerome Sawyer is already on to Eric Heller, because with the help of Carl Meisner, they've been able to positively ID Dieter on the security cam footage. But as Meisner is leaving, he asks, hey, what's up with that company Utrecht you mentioned? There's no file on them whatsoever. And Sawyer kind of just dismisses him, saying, don't ask questions that could cost you a career. Now with this leave of absence, Marissa heads back to France, where her boyfriend is happy to see her, but her boyfriend's child is not. And when she goes to pick him up from school, he basically lashes out at her, saying, you're not my mom. And even though in therapy she says she's not bothered by anything that she did, she is haunted by the sound of babies crying. Now, just because she's on a leave of absence doesn't mean she's not done tracking down Hanna or Eric. She hops on the phone with Meisner, but he's being sent back to Langley by Sawyer. And she's trying to get the full details from Meisner about what happened on that airstrip and why Hanna was apparently leaving Eric, because it's very weird behavior. And all the while, she's on Sophie's Instagram looking at photos, trying to track her down. And right before she hangs up with Meisner, Meisner asks her about Utrecht, but as soon as that conversation pops up, she hangs up the phone because she's found a picture that clearly shows Hanna at a party in England, and now she has her lead. And while Marissa knows where Hanna is, Jerome has been able to locate Eric. And Eric was in really bad shape after getting shot, basically being held together by a doctor who kept telling them you need to take him to a hospital. But they were completely against doing that. And one day while Eric and Elsa are outside, Elsa is suddenly shot and Eric flees. And it doesn't take long for Eric to be completely surrounded, and both Jerome and Dieter pop up. And the reason that Dieter sold him out was because Jerome Sawyer showed up at his work asking about where Eric Heller was, but he played dumb, saying, I haven't seen him in years. But then when Dieter went home, there's Sawyer with his kids. And Sawyer had a sharpshooter with a scope pointed at his children. And when he threatened his children, Dieter didn't really have a choice but to rat Eric out. So in episode 6, Sawyer has taken Eric to a CIA black site and is torturing him and interrogating him, asking where Hanna is, but Eric doesn't know, and he says, she's smarter than all of us. You literally created her like that. So he has no idea where Hanna is, and he has no idea where Marissa is, because she was supposed to be being tailed by somebody, but they've lost her track. So it's not a great day for Jerome Sawyer. And of course, Marissa has gone off to England to find Hanna, who wakes up in the forest early before the group leaves, and the group ends up packing up all their stuff, and Sophie has no idea that Hanna slept with Anton. When they arrive back to Anton's place, Sophie gets out to walk him to the door, but he doesn't want Sophie. He wants to talk to Hanna. So he makes up a lie to get to the passenger seat to talk to Hanna, asking, will I see you again? And Hanna says, Sophie's the one that likes you. The issue is, Anton doesn't like Sophie. He likes Hanna. And Hanna, trying to be a good friend to Sophie, ends up pushing him away and almost breaking his wrist, causing a scene. And at this point, Sophie knows something happened. So when Sophie, Dan, and Hanna end up getting back to Sophie's place, Dan says, I'm out of here. I'm not getting in the middle of this. And Hanna comes clean that she did in fact sleep with Anton. She says that at the party, she could sense that he really wanted her. He could smell it. And she never meant to hurt Sophie's feelings by doing this. But when you sleep with your best friend's crush, they tend to get mad. And Sophie completely freaks out at her, saying she's got to leave, and this is why the family kicked her out in the first place. So when Sophie walks back into her house, she's in no mood to talk. But sitting at her kitchen table is Marissa Wiegler, posing as a woman named Claire, who is Hanna's mom, saying that they're trying to find Hanna, and if Sophie knows where she is, please tell us. But even though Sophie's mad at her, she doesn't rat her friend out. And as Hanna is packing up to leave, Sophie's little brother Jay shows up in the garage and says, oh, you are here. "Oh, your mom's in our kitchen right now looking for you." And Hanna looks through the window and sure enough, positively IDs Marissa Viegler and steals Jay's phone and texts Sophie from Jay's phone saying she's dangerous, please don't tell her anything. And luckily for Hanna, Sophie hasn't yet. But when Jay walked through the door, Marissa could immediately sense that Jay knew something and gets him to spill the beans. So as Hanna is trying to run away, she's getting texts from Sophie leading her to a cafe where instead of Sophie sitting there, it's Marissa Viegler. Marissa tells her that there's no point of running because there's nowhere to go. She also tells her that Eric is dead and that Eric was never her father. Eric and her simply worked on a project and Hanna was one of the subjects. And while she doesn't know who Hanna's real father is, if Hanna comes with her, she'll tell her everything. Because Hanna is dangerous and Marissa needs to look after her. And Hanna says, if I come with you, will Sophie and her family be okay? And she says, yeah. We'll even stop by and say goodbye like a good mother and daughter would. Marissa will then take her to the people that made her, and she'll know everything. So Hanna agrees. But right before they walk into Sophie's house, Marissa gets a phone call from her boyfriend in Paris saying that there was some American woman there looking for her. And as soon as she hangs up the phone, she calls up Sawyer and reams him out, saying, you had no right to do that. That's my private life that you're intruding. But Sawyer says, you broke protocol. What'd you want me to do? Marissa then lets him know that she has the girl. And he says, all right, what do you want? And she wants life to go back to the way it was. She wants Sawyer to go back to wherever he came from. But she also wants to talk to the people above Sawyer to find out what the hell is going on. And Sawyer agrees. So Marissa and Hanna head into Sophie's place, but Sophie isn't there because Sophie got a text message from Dan to come over. Dan found that piece of paper that Hanna found at Dieter's, going through the agreement that Hanna's mother signed over, saying that she didn't have a father. And Dan has typed in the address of this little Romanian town, but most of it is completely blacked out. He wants to know if Sophie has any idea what it is, but Sophie has no clue. She then gets a text message that Hanna is in her house, so she runs back with the piece of paper. And right before they leave, Sophie says, can I just get 2 minutes with Hanna alone? And Marissa, not wanting to look weird, says, yeah, go ahead. And Sophie gets Hanna alone and pulls out the paper and says, what is this? That woman's saying her name is Claire, but this paper says that your mother's name is Joanna. Is that woman your mother or not? And Hanna lies to her and says, yes, she's my mother. Hanna's playing it off like it's nothing, but Sophie can sense that this isn't nothing and it's a big deal, and she's trying to help her. The other two are interrupted by Marissa, who wants to get a move on. With Hanna now in Marissa's custody, Sawyer has no need for Eric and gives the directive to kill him. But when the agent goes in to do so, Eric ends up taking him out, killing him, killing the other guy. But right before he escapes, he grabs a computer and, using the guy's thumbprint, gets access to it. And there's a file in there that says Utrecht's Regenesis. And when he clicks it, there's a bunch of pictures of all of these girls that were born in 2004, 1 year after Hanna escaped. And that's when Eric realizes that they didn't stop the project. He puts on the dead guy's outfit and heads out. And he goes to one of the only people left that can help him, Dieter. And Dieter drives him to the airport and gives him money and a fake passport and explains to him that I had to rat you out because they were going after my family. Hanna and Marissa, meanwhile, have arrived at the hotel that they're supposed to meet Sawyer in. But Hanna is very suspicious about Eric actually dying and starts questioning Marissa about it. When Marissa explains that he was shot to death at the airfield, Hanna just doesn't buy it. At this point, however, Sawyer with a bunch of other agents have arrived at the hotel and are trying to get in place to keep her from escaping. But somebody else has arrived at the hotel, and that's Eric Heller. And when Marissa and Hanna are in a crowded elevator, all of a sudden the door opens up and Eric pops in saying, oh, there you were, pretending to be both Marissa's husband and Hanna's dad. He then gets off at the next floor explaining to Marissa, I want to show Hanna this bar. I'll meet you downstairs, keep the car running. And once again, it's a crowded elevator. She doesn't want to cause a scene, and she just lets it happen. But as soon as she gets down to the main lobby, she lets Sawyer know that Eric has Hanna and they're trying to escape. Eric sets off the fire alarm and immediately the entire hotel is evacuated. And in the middle of it, Hanna does have to take out some of Sawyer's guys, but nobody notices in the middle of the hysteria. Both Hanna and Eric hop into Sawyer's helicopter, take off, and as they're leaving, Hanna starts killing some of the agents that were chasing them. But when she gets Marissa Viegler in her sights, she just doesn't pull the trigger. Thank you for watching this recap. If you do not see the next one up in the corner right there on the end screen, don't worry, it'll be up shortly. Please consider following the channel. That'd be cool. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. And if you don't, there's a thumbs down button for a reason. In episode 7, Hanna and Eric have dumped off the helicopter in a rock quarry and taken off on their own. And the reason that Hanna went with Eric is because she didn't feel safe with Marissa. And this is the point where Eric comes clean with Hanna about everything. He admits to her that they were experimenting on the children, mutating on their DNA, all to gain an advantage. And Hanna's pretty upset thinking that her mother didn't want her, but Eric reminds her that her mother died trying to get her back. And the good news for Hanna is that Joanna told Eric who her real father is. And he wants to see Hanna. He has a family of his own. And even though it was a one-night stand, he's very open to bringing Hanna into his life. And this could be a chance for Hanna to have an actual life, which is very appealing to her. And as they're driving to reunite Hanna with her real dad, Marissa, who is in France, mind you, calls up Sawyer asking, why am I not back with the mission? And he says, it's because you didn't deliver the goods. Sawyer warns warns her to stay in Paris, live your life, but don't come after me. And he's having her monitored, so if she leaves the house, he's going to know about it. Shortly after he gets off the phone with Marissa, Sawyer gets a phone call from a woman named Norris who's above him. And she lets him know that one of their computers was hacked in Berlin, and it exposed the entire Utrecht's Regenesis program, and they're pretty positive that it was Eric Heller. And she's pretty positive with this information, he's headed back to the Utrecht facility in Romania. And it's of the utmost importance that he finds Eric Heller and keeps this under wraps. And Eric is, but before he does so, he stops off at his childhood home to visit his mother, and he hasn't seen his mother in a long time, and it doesn't seem like the two have the best relationship, and he's really only there to get his dad's old guns. His dad died of a heart attack, but he doesn't want Hanna to know. He's keeping her in the car. He also asks his mom if anyone's been there, and she lies and says no, even though Marissa has visited her. Now, Hanna gets sick of waiting in the car, and when she comes inside, Eric's mom invites him to stay the night because she doesn't want them driving the entire time. And since Hanna wants to, Eric obliges. And during dinner, Eric's mom is telling Hanna all about Eric's dad and how great of a guy he was, painting this beautiful picture. But when they go to bed, Eric says, "Don't believe anything my mom says. My dad wasn't happy. I just don't think he ever loved her." And Eric's mom is listening to all of this outside the door, and maybe that's the straw that broke the camel's back because she picks up Marissa's phone number and calls it, alerting her to the fact that Eric is in her house. And even though Marissa got that warning from Sawyer, she heads off to Germany. The next morning, Eric packs up to leave and tells his mom, "If anyone comes here, we were never here." And about 3 hours after that, Marissa shows up. And even though she's too late, Eric's mom lets her know that he's headed east. But that's the only information she's able to get because she was being tracked, and Sawyer and his men have tracked her down at the house and taken her into custody. Sawyer directs his men to try to get the tire tracks to figure out what car Eric's driving, and then tells Marissa, "You just don't get the message, do you?" And she says, "What are you not telling me? Why is Eric going east?" But he doesn't say anything. He just tells his men to take her away. He then calls up Norris and says, "You're right, he is heading back to Utrecht." And Sawyer heads there to try to cut him off. And Marissa is taken to a field by two agents who tell her that she's going to get on a plane. But there's not an airstrip in sight, and she knows it. And she's pretty confident that they're going to murder her, so she takes them out first. And she hops in the car and also tries to head east to run into Eric. And Eric and Hanna, meanwhile, have arrived at the same hotel that Eric and Joanna stayed at the night that they took Hanna from the facility. Right down to the same room. And the next morning, they get up and head to Hanna's real father's house. And they arrive a little bit early, and Eric lies saying his schedule moved up, but the family is very hospitable. And Hanna is planning to stay there for the night to get to know her new brothers and sisters, while Eric was going to head back to the hotel, reassuring them that he'll be back tomorrow to pick her up. And they're playing it off like Eric is her adoptive father. But when they go out to the car to grab Hanna's stuff, Hanna can sense that something's wrong and he's planning something. She sees the gas can in the car. She saw him bring in guns from the car to the hotel. She knows he's planning an attack, and she's worried for him. But as per usual, when she asks Eric, "Where are you going?" he doesn't really answer. And she just can't understand why he won't tell her the truth, but it's because she's safe with that family. And she's not really safe with Eric. Right before Eric leaves, Hanna makes him promise her that he will come back tomorrow, and he does. But shortly after leaving, he calls up Hanna's real dad and says, "You're her father, you know it, I'm not coming back." And Hanna's dad walks back into the room, and Hanna can sense that something went wrong. And she asks if that was Eric on the other line, and his face just tells the real story. And she says, "He's not coming back, is he?" And her real father tries to play it off, saying, "It's for the best, you're not safe with him, stay here, we can change your look, change your identity," but Hanna is totally against that. She runs outside looking for her real dad's car to take and ends up actually assaulting him and getting that car and driving back to the hotel to be with Eric. Now, Eric hasn't made it to Utrecht yet, but Sawyer has, and he's put the entire facility on lockdown, awaiting Eric's arrival. And the doctor at the place who oversees the entire program is not happy because he doesn't want the teenage girls isolated for that long, but Sawyer doesn't really care. But while waiting for Eric to pop up, they get a ping on his car that Eric has arrived back at the hotel. And he's not the only one that's arrived at the hotel, because so has Marissa, and she's got in the room right next to his. But before he goes in that room, he siphons off a bunch of gas into bottles and puts it in the trunk of his car. And as soon as he gets in, he gets a phone call, and it's Marissa Wiegler. She lets him know that he's walking into an ambush and he doesn't even know it, and she's willing to help him because they were about to betray her. But Eric doesn't believe a word she says because she's a really good liar. She then asks Eric, "What did you find?" And he says, "You started the program up." But this is the first time she's hearing this because she was instructed to shut down the program. She had nothing to do with the program restarting. And even though she's saying how she's not in on this, he's not believing her. And Marissa is sensing the fact that Eric is losing his patience with her. And she tries to plead with him, saying, "If you go in there and if you kill everybody, it's still not going to save her because there are people above Sawyer and they're just going to keep coming after her. And if you're planning a suicide mission, that's an even worse approach because without you, who's there to protect her?" She tells him, "I can help you make her safe." He says, "How do you plan on doing that?" The Marissa Wiegler special. Fake passports, new identity, new personality, new appearance. She does it all the time. But then all of a sudden, Eric notices that Marissa is in the same hotel. So he starts kicking down the doors, and the first door he kicks down isn't hers, so the noise alerts her to what he's doing. And by the time he gets to Marissa's door, she's got a gun pointed at him. And she tells him, if you shoot me, Hannah's not going to make it, because we are her only chance. She puts down her gun and says, you need to trust me, and moments later, Sawyer's guys show up, and it looks like it was a setup. Of course, Marissa had no idea that they were showing up. And to save her own life, she grabs the gun and shoots Eric in the shoulder, saying, I didn't know they were coming. Eric takes out a couple soldiers in the hallway and then goes up to his room. And he's picking them off one by one with his dad's hunting rifle, and he gets a phone call from Sawyer asking him to come out because he's surrounded, but he refuses to. And Sawyer says, all right, light him up then. And Eric has kind of run out of ammo at this point, and he is surrounded, and it's not looking good. Until Hanna shows up in the car out of nowhere, taking out most of the guys outside, goes into Eric's room, and gets Eric out of there. And the last person that Eric takes out is Sawyer, who was standing next to Eric's car, the one that was filled with gasoline bottles, and Eric shoots the trunk and the car explodes and Sawyer goes flying. Eric and Hanna get in the car and leave, but Sawyer didn't die. He's still breathing. And that's when Marissa Viegler comes out of the shadows just smiling at him. And in episode 8, you learn that instead of killing Sawyer, Marissa just took him to an abandoned building and is trying to extract information out of him about Utrex. And the people at the Utrex facility are going a little crazy because they haven't heard from Sawyer and have no idea where he is. And they're very aware that things went south at the hotel. So Marissa holds him at gunpoint and makes him call the Utrex facility saying that Eric and Hanna escaped and that he's headed back there now, and don't call the bosses, he'll handle this himself. And as they're driving to the Utrex facility, Sawyer and Marissa are having an argument about morality and what each of them did and how one is just following orders and all of a sudden you grow a conscience. But then Sawyer changes his tune and starts begging for mercy, saying, just let me out on the side of the road, I'm not going to get in your way. But as he's doing so, he's unclipping his seatbelt. And as soon as it's unclipped, he attacks Marissa while she's driving, and their car flips over in the air. And somehow, even though this guy wasn't wearing a seatbelt and Marissa was, he's able to walk out of the vehicle first. I mean, the producers of this show are sending a horrible message to those who already don't wear their seatbelt. But he stumbles over to the fill spout, puts a rag in it, and lights it on fire, and walks off. And Marissa wakes up just in the nick of time and is able to escape before the car explodes. Now, Eric at this time is not doing well. He's dealing with the fact that Marissa shot him and Hanna is able to get that bullet out, but he's still dealing with the internal bleeding from Sawyer shooting him on the airstrip, and he's slowly bleeding out. Hanna stitches him up for the time being, and then Eric shows her the classified document that he found with all the girls with the Utrex Regenesis program. And he explains who all of these girls are, how they're just like Hanna, and Hanna says, we need to get them out. As they're standing right outside of the Utrex facility in the forest, she says how when she was with her real father, she could tell that she also had a family just like that. But unfortunately, it wasn't with him. And she's pretty sure that the family that she actually has is in this Utrex facility. Both Eric and Hanna are then able to break into the Utrex facility and take out a couple guards, but they're seen by the surveillance video. And the woman, who is now in charge with Sawyer being MIA, orders all of the men to go and get them, even though they're extremely short-staffed after Hanna and Eric took out most of their guys at the hotel. Hanna and Eric are making it through the facility, not seeing really a soul, and they make it to the dorm rooms of the girls. And the dorms are locked. And Hanna's knocking on the doors asking if anybody's there, but no one's answering. And Hanna knows that people are in there. Until finally one girl, Trainee 249, answers Hanna's call. And she's a lot more like Hanna and a lot less robot. She's more curious about the world. She kind of acts out. She gets yelled at for it a lot. And Hanna asks her, why are you talking to me while the others aren't? She says they're trained to be obedient. She also lets Hanna know that she can't open the door because they're locked. And Hanna reassures her, I'm going to get you guys out of here. But right before they can do that, Trainee 249 lets them know that 8 men are coming. And now that Eric and Hanna are prepared, they easily take out everybody in the place. They then make their way to the control room where they find the doctor who actually delivered Hanna. And Eric forces him to open the doors at gunpoint even though he really doesn't want to. He says that these girls need to be medicated and monitored. The only place they've ever known is this facility. But with a gun pointed at your head, you don't have a lot of options, and he opens up the doors. And immediately, Trainee 249 walks out, but all the rest of the girls, they stay put. And 249 tries to get her next-door neighbor to come out, but she's reluctant to do so. They're all staying obedient, even though all of the guards are completely dead. And the doctor is tied up in the control room. And then Trainee 249 and Hanna meet face to face. Hanna asks her what her name is, but she keeps saying Trainee 249. She doesn't have a name. So Hanna swipes an ID card and finds out that her actual name is Clara. And Clara is able to see her actual mother's real name, to which you figure at this point she didn't even know she had. Hanna is able to get all of the girls out of their cells saying that I'm just like you, and you guys are now free. And she implores everybody to come with them. And they break up into 2 separate groups kind of surrounding both Hanna, Clara, and Eric. And while Hanna Hanna's excited. You can tell from their faces that they're not really keen to going with them. And then Sawyer gets on the PA system because he was able to walk to a small Romanian house and use their phone and call military backup. And he lets all the trainees know that they're doing a military evacuation, but if any intruders get in their way, they're to act accordingly, i.e., take them out. And one of the girls does that. She attacks Hanna and attacks Eric, but is shot in the head by Clara. And it seems like the rest of the girls are going to follow suit, but they just walk by Eric and Hanna, mean mug the shit out of them, and head outside to be evacuated. And as all the girls are being loaded up into these military vehicles to get out of there, Marissa, who was able to hitchhike to the Utrecht facility, is watching all of this go down, confirming with her own eyes her biggest fear, that they restarted the program. The girls are taken away, put on a plane, and flown somewhere. The building, meanwhile, is set on fire. Even though the doctor really wants the medical records, he's not getting them. Everything needs to be destroyed. Hanna, Clara, and Eric, meanwhile, are kind of trapped in a shooting range. But they've wisely surrounded it with detonation charges. And when they're surrounded by soldiers, Eric flips the switch and the whole place explodes. And any other soldier that survives is taken out by either Hanna or Clara. But when all the dust settles, Eric is doing really bad. I mean, he's on the verge of death and he knows it. And he tells Hanna, just let me go, but Hanna can't do that. She wants to get him to a hospital. So both Hanna and Clara try to get him out of there, but just before they leave, Sawyer pops up with a gun pointed at him. And Eric asks him, just let them go, take me out. But then Sawyer's shot in the head by Marissa, who is standing off to the side without anybody knowing. And Clara goes, who is that person? And Marissa says, I'm a friend. She then walks up to Eric and says, you can't be found here. I'll take care of all this, but you got to get out. She then grabs Sawyer's cell phone, heads back to the facility, calls up Norris saying that Sawyer is dead and she's been shot by Eric Heller, who escaped with Hanna. But Eric is badly injured and he's not going to make it, but that she needs assistance. She then hangs up the phone and shoots herself to make it look convincing. And with Marissa's help, it is true. They have escaped. And Hanna is frantically driving to a hospital to save Eric's life, but she can tell that she's not going to make it in time. So she pulls over the car and is crying while pleading with Eric to wake up, all the while calling him dad. But even with that pleading, it doesn't work and Eric dies. So Clara and Hanna go and bury Eric right at the gravesite of Hannah's mother, which is a place that they visited earlier in the day. And then both Hanna and Clara head off to forge a new life together. Thank you so much for watching this recap of Hanna Season 1. Please subscribe to the channel. I would really appreciate that more than anything. If you liked the recap, though, hit the thumbs up button. And if you thought it sucked, hit the thumbs down button. And if you know somebody that watches this show and needs a recap, hit the share button and please send it their way.